It's Canadian Whiskey Week leading up to the Canadian Whiskey Awards, and I thought there is no better time than now to talk about my top Canadian whiskies of the year. My name is Matt. This is Whiskey on the West Coast. For my top 5 Canadian whiskies of 2025, there are really only a few rules. Number 1, it has to be a Canadian whiskey. Number 2, it has to have been released for the first time in 2025. And number 3, it must be excellent. We're kicking off our list with a whiskey from a distillery I had never tried before this year, and from a brand new independent bottler. And that whiskey is the Glenveagh Whiskey Co. Stoneboat Vineyards Pinotage Cask Finish Single Malt Whiskey. It's distilled at the Tumbleweed Distillery in Osoyoos in the South Okanagan of British Columbia. It's about 5 years old as far as I can tell. 43% ABV, non-chill filtered. Technically, I believe it's a non-age statement whiskey, but I know previous releases from this distillery, from this independent bottler, were in that 5-year range. So that would be my suspicion. It's a whiskey that's finished in a Stoneboat Vineyards Pinotage cask from the Black Sage bench, and it's a single cask of only 273 bottles, and it costs about $95 from the store on the website. And Glenveagh, they're a new independent bottler, and something of a trend in Canada right now at this moment is brand new independent bottlers. We've got Glenveagh, we've got Spirit for Us, we've got Bedford Park. It's really quite something, and it's really cool to see. And what they've been able to do is actually something quite successfully, I'd say, is they've been able to use the unique strengths of the place that they're from to present us with a engaging, flavorful, and singular whiskey experience. The first thing that they're doing is that they're aging whiskeys in the desert microclimate of the South Okanagan here in British Columbia. And yes, we have deserts in Canada, and in the desert in South Okanagan and in Osoyoos, around that area, Oliver and Penticton, it gets tremendously hot and dry in the summer, and it's bitterly cold in the winter. And that means that there's a lot of really key interaction with the oak casks. What this means is a wickedly high angel share, where the casks increase in alcohol percentage but decrease in the actual liquid volume left in the casks. The other key aspect is that they're using extremely high quality and fresh wine casks. This region of BC produces some of the best wines in all of Canada, and while I'm a wine cask skeptic, when you get them freshly dumped from world-class wineries, the odds of a bad cask are much lower. We're talking days in between, possibly the same day that these casks are being filled, instead of months on container ships where they could spoil and go bad. So far, they've used 4 different types of wine casks to go along with this Tumbleweed Distillery single malt from 3 different VQA wineries, 2 of which I've visited myself in the past. This one's from the Stoneboat Vineyards Pinotage cask, and it's been my favorite of the 3 I've tried so far, just edging out the Hester Creek Syrah cask. I got tasting notes like chocolate, blackberries, raspberries, cherries, some earthy tobacco with pepper. Really engaging whiskey for 43% ABV. And while it's a lower ABV, it still is non-chill filtered, so it's retaining all those necessary oils and flavors that we like. I'm also happy to see that their 4th release is also from a Stoneboat Vineyards cask, and it's their Pinot Noir cask. So that should be actually pretty good too, if it keeps on trend with what this one did. Honestly, if you want to explore Canadian single malt from wine casks, this desert-aged wonder is absolutely the place to start. Next up in 4th place, we have a first for Canada, an award-winning craft distillery that has not just created a new whiskey, but an entirely new category of Canadian whiskey. And that whiskey is the Sons of Vancouver Canadian Wheated Rye Whiskey. It's from North Vancouver in British Columbia, from the Sons of Vancouver Distillery. It's 3 to 5 year old whiskey, bottled at 50.5% ABV from ex-bourbon and new American oak casks. It's a batch release, so it's a returning product, and it retails for about $96 Canadian. Now, you're probably already familiar with Sons of Vancouver, as they rose to prominence after winning Best Canadian Whisky at the Canadian Whisky Awards for their first release of Palm Trees and Tropical Breeze. Well, they haven't exactly been resting on the success of their past releases. They've been busy making more whiskey, and in this case, this whiskey is one that they've dubbed Canada's original wheated rye. And what's a wheated rye? Well, it's a rye whiskey that's made with a high proportion of wheat in the mash. The Sons of Vancouver wheated rye is about 75% rye and 25% wheat. In this case, they are the first to have done it in Canada. What the weed adds to the whiskey is something that I've noticed from weeded bourbons in the past, and that's that it softens the profile a bit, creating a more approachable, nuanced, and ultimately enjoyable whiskey. You still get the sweet baking spices, the brown sugar, and the toffee notes of rye, but you also get vanilla pod, marshmallow, and in this case, apricot, as well as a more rounded mouth feel. Really, the only thing more impressive from this small but mighty Canadian distillery is the fact that other Sons of Vancouver releases are typically once and done whiskeys, but in this case, this is actually a core range whiskey release meant to be available on shelves so you can enjoy it over and over again. That's pretty damn impressive stuff. And this is still available from the distillery website as well as liquor store shelves in BC and Alberta. It's great whiskey. Third on our list is a whiskey from another independent bottler, and it's a whiskey that they actually released an age-stated bottling of before the distillery itself had ever released one themselves. And that whiskey is the Spirit for Us McAloney's triple distilled Canadian whiskey. It was distilled at McAloney's Island Distillery in Sláinte on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It's triple distilled Irish style whiskey using both malted and unmalted BC grown barley. It's 4.5 years old, distilled in 2021 and bottled in 2025. It's 53% ABV. Spent 3.5 years in American Virgin Oak and 1 year in Refill X Bourbon Barrel. There's 105 bottles total and it retails for $90 Canadian. This whiskey is my favorite Spirit for Us release to date. And I'm not surprised though, as whiskey that was used for this bottling here was also used for a previous whiskey release, the Spoonie's 149th blended Canadian whiskey from earlier this year, which was also an extremely crushable, delicious whiskey. This whiskey is just so damn drinkable though, and just does what it does really well. And that's like giving you flavors like chocolate, cherry, leather, oak, coffee. Just, it's a straight up crowd pleasing whiskey. And one that I've shared with a lot of people who also agree. This one beat out many other more high profile whiskeys. Only 105 bottles exist in total because they split the cask in 2 different releases. However, it's still available from the Last Straw distillery website. The runner-up on my list in second place is another first for Canadian whiskey. At least I'm fairly certain it's the first, because they would be the first to ever use Garryana oak casks in maturing a whiskey. And that whiskey is the Stillhead Garryana Oak Single Grain Rye Whiskey, Batch Strength Batch 1. Now, it's from Duncan on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. It's 3.5 years old, bottled at 64% ABV. It's from a number 2 char American Virgin Oak cask, as well as being finished in those aforementioned Garryana Oak casks. Batch 1 of the higher strength edition, I'm going to say cask strength, was 98 bottles total. This is one of them. And it comes in this this cool box that Brennan, the distillery owner, distiller, blender, made himself. He made one for each one of these cask strength edition bottles. Retailed, I believe, for about $175 Canadian. As I mentioned earlier, to my knowledge, this is the first ever Canadian rye whiskey, or Canadian whiskey in general, to ever use Garryana oak casks. I know Westland down in Seattle used it for their single malt, but in Canada, this would be a first. Now, Garryana oak is the only oak species native to the West Coast, North America, but specifically, in my case, the only native oak species in British Columbia. And in British Columbia, it's actually found on the southern part of Vancouver Island and in the eastern Fraser Valley, where I live. I know this batch, as I mentioned, spent 3.5 years in number 2 char American Virgin Oak casks before being transferred to Refill Garryana Oak casks. So Refill Garryana Oak, which is probably a good thing because Garryana Oak can actually be quite active as a cask. To my understanding, Oregon is where most of the Garryana Oak casks used in whiskey and beer aging are typically sourced from. Now, Garryana Oak is quite tannic. It's high in fluvenol, a compound that makes Garryana oak whiskeys like much darker in taste and oakier. I found that the way Brennan described this particular whiskey was pretty accurate, where everything's just a bit darker. Caramel is molasses, milk chocolate's dark chocolate, cafe latte is espresso roast. These are the sort of things. Expect big tasting notes like molasses, baking spices, dark honey, cola, cocoa, and coffee. While you likely can't get the specific cask strength version of it because it's not available on their website anymore of the distillery, you can get the, I guess, bottle strength is what they're calling it, version of this, which is bottled at 50% ABV. It's available actually not from the distillery where they're sold out, but in Alberta at places like Craft Cellars. It's selling for about $120. And Serge at Whiskey Fun, if you want another opinion on this, actually reviewed that whiskey because it was actually exported to Switzerland of all places as well. And when he reviewed it, he gave it a score of 88 out of 100, which is a fantastic score for a Canadian rye whiskey. Now, before we get to our best Canadian whiskey of 2025, I do just want to mention in 2023, the winner was the Shelter Point 12-year-old single malt, a fantastic whiskey, my favorite from Shelter Point so far. In 2024, the winner was the Two Brewers Release number 44, a fantastic single malt in its own right. These are two of my favorite distilleries in Canada. And yet I have to give a disclaimer. These two excellent distilleries are noticeably absent on this list this year. And why is that? Well, they didn't make the cut this year because I just simply did not try anything new from them. I didn't get to try anything new from them, largely because there's only so much whiskey money to go around. There's only so many bottles I can purchase and then in resulting try. So I'm sorry about that. I want to try more. I hope to try more from these two wonderful distilleries in 2026. But with that, guys, we should get to the whiskey that's in my glass, which happens to be my #1 Canadian whiskey of the year. My top Canadian whiskey of 2025 comes from the other distillery I consider to be in my top 3 distilleries in the entire country. And it's one I followed extremely closely because I absolutely love their peated single malts. My top Canadian whiskey of the year for 2025 is the McAloney's Peat Project Isla Peat ex-bourbon cask single malt whiskey. This was distilled at McAloney's Island Distillery in Saanich on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. It's approximately around 4.5 years old, though technically non-age statement. It's 46% ABV. It's from a single ex-bourbon cask. It's bottled at 46% ABV. It's 54 ppm phenol parts per million. It's cask number 663 specifically, and from that cask there was 290 bottles total. The first thing I have to address is the fact that this used to retail for about $130 Canadian. However, McAloney's has restructured their prices across the board, which is awesome news. So where this used to be about $130 Canadian, it now retails from the distillery for $85 Canadian. $45 is a huge difference. And honestly, one of the only criticisms that I had heard about McAloney's in the past from whiskey lovers is the higher than market average pricing. But what I'm most excited about is that they finally did what I've been begging for years and released some of their peated single malt in ex-bourbon casks. That's huge. That's huge. The claim has always been that they have a particularly fruity spirit, but to me, heavy-handed casks have always obscured that spirit. I can't really get a bearing on, well, what is the McAloney house signature to this spirit? It's really hard to see the whiskey's true spirit character. This is the answer to that. We can finally see what McAloney's peated spirit anyways is all about, instead of having to try and decipher it through the cask of a, say, Portuguese STR red wine cask. This year, they released a pair of Peat Project releases from ex-bourbon, the Washington Peat and the Isla Peat, and we could finally get a glimpse at that McAloney's spirit. And what's more, we could finally get from the Peat Project 2 different peat sources from this same cask type, so we could do a comparison of peat terroir. What's Western North American peat like versus Isla peat when using BC grown barley that's been peat smoked at the distillery on Vancouver Island? That's a huge thing. Honestly, I should probably do a comparison video, but this Isla Peat Project just spoke to me a bit more than that Washington one. It's much more on the maritime coastal type of peat compared to, say, that woody, kind of like earthy Washington peat type. This Isla Peat ex-bourbon cask McAloney's Peat Project is just incredibly complex as well. I have to say, you can pull a lot of fruit notes from it, like pears and light stone fruits, maybe even some cherries, but you also pull herbaceous notes from it. And on top of that, you're getting dessert notes like vanilla and caramel toffee from that ex-bourbon cask. You've got these earthy yet coastal peat notes, again, the medicinal iodine seaweed coastal vibes. And on top of that, you have these more rich, refined notes of like leather, some like nice oak. I can't imagine what this is going to taste like if it ever hits 10 years. It's just a really phenomenally complex whiskey. One that I am so glad I have a bottle of, and I think you should really think about picking up as well. So there you have it. The best Canadian whiskey for the year 2025 is the McAloney's Peat Project Isla Peat ex-bourbon cask single malt. This is a beautiful whiskey. I hope you guys get to try it. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Thank you for watching these videos, for commenting. Let me know in the comments below, what was the best Canadian whiskey you had in 2025? And until next time, guys, from the West Coast, Sláinte.